Okay, good evening, everybody. How's everyone doing? Hope everyone is okay. I was just checking to make sure the microphone is on. And wow, last 3 or 4 hours has certainly changed the mood of where things were potentially going for Bitcoin and the cryptocurrency market. But perhaps this wasn't, a complete left field correction that we're currently experiencing. I mean, Bitcoin's down nearly $4,000 today, approximately. Thank you, Chris. 3%. A lot of the other altcoins are, single digits still, but higher than 3%. And we're just seeing falling across the board, with maybe the exception of BNB, which we'll talk about in a little bit. But, I'm here to try and remind everybody it is October, okay? And it's day 7 of October, and it's the first red day that we've actually seen. In fact, actually, the previous 6 days, it's been up only. A matter of fact, I think we've pretty much climbed from about 112,000 to setting a new all-time high of 126,000, making my thumbnail out of date. And we are having a bit of a pullback. So we're going to go through all of that. We're going to talk about Uptober. We're going to just get you bored of Uptober, actually, talking about it that much. We'll go through Bitcoin. We'll go through where we think end of cycle is going to be, prices. We'll have a look at all that sort of stuff. We'll have a look at some of the other charts out there. Take any questions that you guys may have. None of them were sent through to me, so any of you got in the chats, feel free. And then we'll just see where we are after going through all of that. But without any further ado, let's just dive into the charts if I can find the right button. Here we go. Bitcoin on the 3-day time frame. And let's just blow this up a little bit bigger, shall we? So for those of you that didn't tune in on Friday, we burst through that 117,200 level with little difficulty, to be perfectly honest with you. And as we discussed on Friday, the momentum was certainly there over the weekend for us to make another attempt at the all-time high, which we did do, taking the all-time high, I think, on Sunday and yesterday. So we had that momentum going through. Now that we've seen an all-time high taken, and given that we actually, over the last 10 days, have climbed sort of 12-14%, it's only natural that we're probably going to experience some form of a pullback, and that is exactly what we're experiencing today. Quite a big pullback, actually. As I said, nearly $4,000 at the extremes of it, although starting to see some signs of recovery. We'll have a look at where that goes. Now, you're probably wondering, Harry, where's that yellow line? What's that doing? It's not really telling us much. Well, it's a bit of a cheat, because actually, if you go on the weekly time frame, this yellow line's lining up quite nicely now as previous resistance and what I'm looking at as potentially support in and around that $120,000 level, which we'll discuss a little bit later on. But on the 3-day time frame, it's a little bit of a mess, so that's why I've left it in yellow. Obviously, from a 3-day point of view, 117,250 is the big level that we want to be having a look at, and we'll just try and see where the move up has, what it's left in its wake, to see if there's any clues as to where we may end up going back. But as I said on Friday, as I probably even said last week, a fall back to 117,000 is not a bad thing, okay? We just need to bear that in mind. What I would say is, as price stays above 120,000, if we can stabilize above that, I would be classing ourselves as moving into the next ranging leg if we don't continue higher. And I'll try and explain that as we go on different timeframes a little bit later on. In terms of Bitcoin dominance is just moving sideways. Can't really make its mind up at the moment. Strong moves from Bitcoin being countered by, hi there, Kerry, being countered by some high percentage altcoins, particularly BNB. BNB actually flipped for a time. I don't know if it still is there. It might still be there, actually. Flipped Tether and XRP to climb into the 3rd spot of altcoins out there. So we are seeing some strong movers, which are certainly restricting Bitcoin dominance climb back up. But what I would just sort of bear in mind, I know it's not the cleanest, but there's some sort of, we are snaking up along this one, and hell, you could start drawing lines like this, or you could start drawing lines like this. They're all the lines that we're kind of hoping for, to see some sort of break back down there. But ultimately, I'm just actually looking at this bottom line. We are finding some support as we're climbing back up through that. And if October is going to be what it's like in the past, I would actually expect Bitcoin dominance to climb before rolling over, like we saw last year, move through October with Bitcoin taking the reins, and then November, we saw altcoins dominate for about 4 or 5 weeks leading into December. Not saying history automatically has to repeat itself, but that's something that I'd certainly be looking towards. But right now, Bitcoin dominance not doing too much. And then as we look at total 2 market cap, it's retested the previous all-time high of 1.74 trillion. We've seen that pullback, rejection, whatever you want to call it, pullback, I'm calling it, from that move there. Let's just see how the dust settles from profit taking, from just, natural breathing of the markets, and see where it's going. But for me right now, it made a higher high. We're just having a bit of a pullback there. If it comes back down to that 1.61 trillion, I'm all right with that. As long as we find some support, and I think the narrative, if Bitcoin is going to take a bit of a lead, that we may see that that's where the support is before altcoins take over again. We'll just monitor that one going through, and then we move on to, no, we don't. Now we move on to BitTensor. And yeah, some strong moves from BitTensor. Again, I never saved the charts, but we kind of talked a couple of times now about, give me a bit of a license for this here. Put it back to where it originally was. We pretty much bounced off the bottom of that channel. We made a nice strong move over the last couple of days. I actually think BitTensor, with the exception of BNB, led the pack yesterday in terms of the altcoin move. So nice strong move up there, pretty much taking it to, I don't know, around about 350, 355 it was saying the top was in. What I just don't like, and maybe it's just timing, is it's actually started to correct. I just needed it to get above that 160 level, and we haven't yet. And that just, gives me that little bit of a doubt. I'm like, come on, BitTensor, we can do better than that. I'm just not liking, there's some sort of symmetry there. Okay, you could actually draw. Do you know what? I'll wait for the other chart. It's going to get incredibly messy. But I just don't like the fact that on that run up, we haven't made a higher high. I'm not saying it can't happen, but we'll have a look at that. Plenty of time on this one here. The rest of the market shut the bed. It's not like BitTensor's doing it on its own. But come on, just throw us a bone here. Give us a higher high so we can start talking about this positively. So yeah, that's where we are with those. We'll come back to some more charting in a moment. Not really going to go over any news today because I kind of got a bit sick and tired looking the last 3 days. Because all it was bullish article after bullish article after bullish article. And if that's not starting to smell a bit ripe as to where the market may be going, I just thought, what's the point? Yeah, the Senate still hasn't opened or hasn't agreed to open the US market. And for the last 5 days, however long, that's not been a problem. Today, maybe that's a problem. I'm not necessarily sure that this is the reason that the Bitcoin has fallen, particularly when you have a look on the right-hand side here. And, the NASDAQ, it made an all-time high again today. It has corrected since, but it did make an all-time high. This is just natural market breathing. Gold, not quite at it, but almost at the $4,000 level. I mean, it got to 3,990. I mean, we seem to be just finding money from nowhere to get some of these prices. But that's just the sign of the market and the sign of the times that we're potentially in. So yeah, in terms of looking at Bitcoin on the 12-hour like we like to do, for those of you, again, that weren't here Friday, the gray box was the previous short liquidation levels. The longs just burst straight through that one with absolutely zero fuss. By the time we got to Friday, this has actually come back down. It's consolidating on it nicely. How the picture now looks with a new all-time high and breaking through those levels, if you remember on Friday, the order book was relatively thin to the downside. We are seeing a little bit of noise, I suppose, or liquidation levels at least, being built up in that similar block. So around about 118,500 to 120,000. Talking again about that psychological level of 120,000 there. So we're seeing it. It's not huge. It's not a massive depth to it, but it's an area which, given how Bitcoin's price has moved, maybe we look to retest that. And as I mentioned on the weekly time frame, there is some sort of a confluence there with 120,000 being a previous resistance level. But likewise, now that we have made an all-time high, people will probably shorten this all the way up, but the only ones that are still left standing are where the all-time high turned around. Remember, that was 126,265. So we're seeing a bit of a block again building just in and around that level, but that just sort of is staying there right now. Let's see how that builds up over the time. I have started to add a few of these other fib levels. So it's been a while since we've done. Let's just zoom out for a second. It might be remember, okay, this was how it was originally looked. For those of you that maybe have not been in RT for a year, you might not have seen how this was originally drawn. But this big blue line that goes from bottom left to top right is for all intensive purposes, we're on the daily time frame here. Just a line of importance. I've moved it up so you can kind of see it above my head. But since the start of the bull market, so we're talking January 2023, we have had significant plays off this. You know, okay, we have lost it at times, then it's acted as support resistance, but this line has just done so well. Kept on going all the way through 2024 into 2025, and then since 2025, inauguration day, we ain't seen it, okay? But we've been having another thing running at the same time, which is this fib level, which basically ran from March 24 all the way down to the August 24 lows, so down here, and we just extrapolated it out, and we've been living in the plus territory, so plus one. I did plus 1.272, 1.414, 1.6182, and then 2.618, 3.618, etc., etc. I thought I'd just add the 2.72s and the 4.14s onto this chart, just to give us some more targets that we can kind of have a look at, because the gaps between some of these are getting quite big now. These lines have always been there. I've never changed them, but I thought I'd add them on. And we can actually start to see that there is some logic to again, these lines, which still, to me, cements the fact that actually, from a big picture point of view, that I always start these off, nothing necessarily needs to change. That trend line, I think, is still a player. And where it looks at the top, I'll have a look in a moment. But these fib levels still worked out. You know, they've not altered in the whole time. And we can actually see, you know, these previous all-time highs were tests of significant fib levels. I've left them in blue because, you know, they're not ones people often talk about. But hitting those, coming back down, I mean, okay, they're not exact, but they're pretty darn close. As a matter of fact, this should be on the 12-hour time frame. That's what we normally do it on. So yeah, so anyway, we've had that move back up, and these are just two that I would be looking at. Now, there isn't any confluence in terms of where some of these liquidation levels are lining up, but ultimately, that's, you know, we did break through that over the last 12 hours, so that could have been where they started. We are going to talk about end of cycle stuff, but just to extrapolate up where this blue line goes, again, at the moment, if the market was to end, well, okay, let's just say it ends in December. It's going to be, you know, around about just under that 250 level. So, you know, I think it's still there. I think depending on how high we get, obviously, this line could be that player that we get too high and then that's what it rejects off. And that's why I just leave it there. It's out of sight, out of mind at the moment because we haven't looked at it in a year. But I'm not discounting it because it was just so strong all the way through this. So we just leave it on this chart. And then when we start getting close to it, we can start to have some of those discussions. But it's interesting that a lot of these other fib levels are lining up with levels that people are talking about, 180,000. 210. The blue line is going to hit around about that 220 and 250 levels, depending on the timing of when it gets to the top. So I think there's some reason to leave those there. As I say, we'll just keep on monitoring those. But in terms of this, despite today's pullback, it still doesn't look that bad. You know, I mean, just look at that. You know, the speed that this has climbed up. Yeah, we would expect some form of pullback. Okay, and so we're starting to have that. Okay. We have broken the 2.272. We've still got 5 hours to go. Let's see how this closes. We get a close above 222,000 or on 220,000. That fib level has worked out quite nicely again, tying in with these wicks here. And okay, we lost it a little bit there, but you can sort of see where there's some sort of governance. So that's something that I'll just be looking at. In terms of canary in the coal mine, so whether or not we need to, you know, shit the bed, not really. BlackRock still, I mean, BlackRock themselves yesterday bought nearly $1 billion worth of their ETF. Okay, well, investors did. And the total amount, 1.2 billion, is the second largest amount of the entire nearly 2-year period that the ETFs have been going. So there is still a massive amount of demand and interest with Bitcoin, even at its all-time high of 125,000, which just goes to show you that perhaps we're not in the smartest stage of the cycle at the moment. But as long as we can just keep reminding ourselves that, you know, at some stage we need to exit to make some profit, we can start using these as indicators of where we may need to go. BlackRock itself, I mean, they've got 93. This was at 97. I was going to talk about how they're close to nearly 100 billion. Obviously, with the price dropping as it is, 93 billion dollars worth of Bitcoin. I'm so sorry, my dog's just wandering around. So yeah, still doing okay. Still no need to necessarily worry. From an ETF point of view, things have gone a lot quieter on Ethereum when it loads. We're still in the red, we're still buying, but just not at the velocity that we were buying over the summer. BlackRock is still trying to gobble up as much as it can, but it is nowhere near those levels. I said back in July, 400 million, 500 million a day were being bought, and yeah, we're starting to wane below that. But we'll just keep monitoring as that goes. And then, we'll start big picture first, and then we'll work our way down into some of the charts in here. But what is there to fear when you look at a chart like this? Bitcoin weekly time frame, 20 and 50 EMA, apologies. 50 EMA is what we're worried about. Well, 50 EMA, conveniently and handily enough for us, now sits at the $100,000 mark. So still have a 20% or just under 20% fall before we get to that. What we're looking for, the end of the bull market, weekly closes below that, start to thinking about where we sit. But actually, let's just take a look at the 20. Let's get rid of the 50 just to really focus our mind on it. Look at the 20. We've never said that it's perfect, but it has held us strong. Since April, since the tariff collapse, it has held as well. Prior to that, the 20 EMA has been holding us for the last year. And it was only the discussions in and around the tariff introduction that brought us under that one. I would argue a much needed market reset anyway. But since then, the 20 EMA has been a really good indicator of where the market has been, frequently retested, never really broken. So we hit it, we bounced strong from it, and we can start to now to think about where we're going to find ourselves. Because as I mentioned, I'm not going to draw these too neat because some of them are pretty historical, but we had a range pattern there, kind of had a range pattern here. You could argue it's there, and whether or not you want to join them all up, I'm not really going to fight you on it. But yeah, a little range pattern there. And then we've had this pattern that we've been ranging in, a little bit neater. I'm going to zoom into this one. Let's just get rid of this one here so we can see a little bit cleaner. And we've kind of had that sort of range through. But ultimately, as a matter of fact, let's just draw it neater. Let's just get it done with some horizontal lines here and here, roughly. Okay, we've just wicks through it, I get it, but we could argue that we have just nicely ranged in here for the past 3 months, but we've broken through it. Most importantly, we've closed above it. And so the argument could be held now, and we have to wait for a couple more candles. I'm sorry, I need you to be patient. But if we stay above this level, 120,000, we don't know where the top's going to be. At the moment, it's 126. We'll just have to wait and see. But it could very well be that we're just forming the next range in and around here. This is going to potentially be the base. So that's what I'm looking for. Weekly time frame, pretty strong level. So much resistance all the way through July and August, and a little bit in September. I'd like to think that there's a good amount of support here, unless there's some sort of, I wouldn't say black swan, but grayish swan that kind of drives sentiment a little bit lower. But nevertheless, that's sort of where I'm looking from there. And before we go low into some of the time frames, most of you have seen this. And we kind of we think we understand this. We think we've seen this chart. We know that we're going to be the ones that tap out exactly at euphoria. We're going to be fine. It's not a problem for us. But that's rarely what actually happens, unfortunately. And so I just, in my point of view, where do I think we are? I think we're here. I think we're in the thrill stage now. I really do. Whether you are a Q1 2026 or Q4 2025 top, the point is that I think we're getting into that thrill. People are starting to get pretty excited about the movements, whether that be Uptober narrative, whether that just be portfolios going green, Bitcoin at all-time high, BNB all-time high, Solana starting to wake up, meme coins are going to escalate again. Whatever the narrative necessarily seems to be, people seem to be a lot more excited. And I probably can tell you that we're in the thrill stage because I've actually started leverage trading again, which is a dangerous sign to the market to say that we are near the top because I'm not very good at it. But we are getting to that point where those that have been in the market for long enough, we're still trying to squeeze as much out as we can because we understand that the end is near. So we're going to extend our element of risk potentially. But we're starting to see new people talking about this. People who potentially never have, or those that have been away for a while, starting to at least ask those questions about what's going on with Bitcoin. I've heard that it's over 125,000 or whatever it may be. So I'd just be careful. We don't have a timescale on when these are, but for me, that's where I think we are. I think we're in that thrill stage. We've got one more. We've got that time where we can convince the world that we are the greatest. When we start taking screenshots of our portfolios, that's when we know we should probably be taking profit. if you feel the need to take a screenshot and send it to someone who doubted you from a few years ago, that's when you know deep down that you probably should be starting to take some profits from there. I don't think we're quite at the euphoria stage yet, but given whether you're a 4-year cycle type of person, whether you're a Bitcoin 4-year cycle type of person, whether you're just, I'm waiting for the blow off top and whatever, we have got maybe 2 stages, because we're still in thrill, to go. This euphoria one is quick though. So just remind yourselves of that, and just, you determine where you think you are. Maybe you still think we're down in belief, and that's fine, but you've got to understand, you've got to justify to yourself why you think you're there. But I'm in the thrill camp for now. I certainly am enjoying it, so that always helps. Get rid of those, and let's turn that off. So we'll try and say big picture again. We are in October after all, and we've seen, I'm not going to go through the figures again. We did that last week and the week before, but we've seen October's, the muck rib rally, whatever you want to call it, leads to pretty good gains, and the start of not condensed, well, it is condensed in a short time period, but consolidated gains, hopefully over the next 3 months, October, Halloween rally, into the Santa rally, and then we can sort of go from there. And so, let's be realistic. When we went on Discord, Jared asked to put a poll out. I've done the poll. There were 75. Some people decided to take their votes off, but 75 people have kind of done it. And I'm just having a look at the spread here. There's a fairly decent majority that's sitting anywhere from 150,000 to 220,000. And there's a few votes that think it may go ever so slightly higher. I appreciate some people think, the top is imminent, and fair enough, but for the discussion I'm going to have now, I'm not discounting that sort of 13% there, but from just a charting point of view. So this is sort of what led to where I'm going. So I started to mark off some of these levels. So 112,000 was where we were at the start of October, and then I just put 150, 180, 220, 250. And then what you can kind of see on the right side, let's just get rid of this, give ourselves a bit more room, is I've got Q4 and Q1. Whichever side of the argument you want to fall on, that's absolutely fine. You know where I sit, and I am happy to be proven wrong. I'm not going to just sell everything on the December 31st, so we're continuing to make all-time highs. If before we get to the December 31st, we're starting to lose some momentum, then maybe. But we can kind of look, and I just want to kind of, I suppose point out, one, we don't have that much time to get to some of these levels, and I'm on the logarithmic chart, so these gaps don't look as big as perhaps they can do. You go on the linear chart, suddenly these are some quite high mountains to climb. But we have seen in previous cycles the impossible happen. Look, I said I wouldn't show you, but I'm gonna, just for the sake of it, I'll just do it for 2017, the first one I really experienced. A 440% increase in not even 3 months. It was actually in 2 months, that, because it was the 17th of December or whenever we actually topped. So we're certainly going to be able to see those. Whether you want to go from, the second peak, it's still a 70% increase, or if you want to have a look at how we did in 2020, and even if we take it to top of the year, that was still nearly a 300% increase. So this asset can move incredibly fast. We established that last week. Don't necessarily need to go through it again. But I just want to sort of say that, once you draw it out on the charts here, actually, I don't think it looks too bad. Whether you sit in the 180 camp or the 220 camp, we're talking somewhere between a 60 and a 100% increase from where we were at the beginning of the month. Bearing in mind, we've actually already made $8,000 of that. Hell, when I started drawing this up earlier on today, we were still at 124,000. We had made 12 grand of that. How quickly things can change. But I think it's not out of the depths of lunacy that we can start to talk about some of these levels. And hell, we may even be able to go higher. But history has shown us that we can achieve that, and we can achieve that in 3 months, never mind in 6 months. The only thing I would say, and I hate to say this time is different, is we haven't seen that explosion yet. And we've talked about that before in terms of Bitcoin has kind of taken its time, sort of working through this range, nice and slowly. Yes, there's been step increases and we've just fallen back into it. Step increases, fallen back into it. But those step increases have diminished over time. they're still happening, but the percentage of which they happen isn't moving as fast. And these ranges, they range anywhere from 3 to 9 months. And so what we kind of need to buck from this trend. We need to find that banana zone. I've seen people calling it, whatever you want to call it, where actually, instead of just, meandering through, and that might be the case that gets us to 150,000, fine. But for those of us that are thinking 180 to 220, we really need to see, these sort of moves, that actual kind of uptick there. So we've definitely seen before. We've definitely seen at the climax of a couple of Bitcoin tops, and it can happen. So this month is a make or break month for us, and let's not get too upset that we've seen 1 day out of 7 with a bit of a pullback. It's nothing compared to where things have gone ultimately in the past. But if I just take these off just for a second, and I don't like using these charts as in the Bitcoin Magazine Pro charts, because they're very difficult to kind of use, but people have seen rainbow charts, they kind of understand how they work. I've tried to go in and find some similar kind of indicators, which I'll throw onto Discord afterwards, so you can put them on your charts yourself. Oh, let's get rid of these. Let's get rid of that. And so how these rainbow charts have kind of worked in the past is they're sort of based on fibs as well. And it's been a case of each time we've gone up, we've hit one of these levels, it's marked the top. And notice I haven't said red each time. We've hit the sort of a level, and then we've seen that correction from that. And in the first cycle, although it was split over 2, we hit the red, okay? The next cycle, it was here, we hit the red again. Then last cycle, with the 2 splits, you can see we hit green first and then we hit orange. And so the thought process at the moment is, are we going to be in and around this white line, or can we hit the yellow? I mean, I know we can talk about hitting green and red, but when we start talking about some of those figures there, I think we're going to probably want to rule those out. Now, these are sloping upwards, so depending on how long it takes, that is going to move into the past. And I'm going to very crudely now try and extrapolate some of these across based on the current angle when we sort of zoom in. We can kind of actually already see, right? That needs to be a bit shallower. About there. That is okay. Right, zoom back in now. You can kind of actually already see that this orange line, which is what people are talking about, is gonna hit, because it was green before. So orange is where it's going to go towards. Is actually talking in and around that 220 to, if I suppose, I mean, this is a straight line, it's not going to go quite that. If you get all the way to Q1, maybe that 250 kind of level, which obviously is 100% increase from where we currently sit at the moment. It's going to make those of you that are holding Bitcoin a very enjoyable portfolio to look at. Whereas this white line, because remember this one here had 2 tops, and it did actually hit the orange that second time, although you could argue it didn't quite hit it, which is why people are saying orange is the one this time. That's kind of moving in and around about that 150. It's that slower pace that we were ultimately talking about, but driving that one in. Now, that's only one chart, but it does give us an indication, again, how we can get there. And one, we know speed-wise we can do it. 2, these levels, which, hey, I've just pulled a rainbow chart out. It's one that people have talked about. You can also have the golden multiplier, which is also based on the fib levels. And then if I throw this one on, take this one off, which is very similar. This is the rainbow wave, which, again, is very similar to this one. I've just taken some of the colorings out. You can kind of see hit the red, hit the orange, hit the red there. Oops, what's happened? And so as we come down here, can we get up to this? Oh, this is looking very messy now. It looked a lot cleaner for me earlier on. We're already on the yellow, but we're not saying that we're in the tops yet. But we can kind of see even with this as to why we're having some sort of resistance here to move it through. Would we want to get to this orange line and then extrapolating it out? You are talking that 170 to 180 level. So this is just one metric. I completely understand that. I did a whole talk at a cuddle about plenty of other indicators you can use, which will give you, from on-chain data of where previous cycle tops have been. And if you remember that, I was kind of talking that 180 to 240 level. I'm sorry I couldn't get any more exact than that, but some of these are a little bit different, but it's still lining up that that's possible. And the point I'm just, I suppose, trying to make is, whilst it may seem that the end is very close, if you believe that the cycle is going to peak at Q4, it doesn't mean that it can't happen. And so we just got to remind ourselves, and today's like today, actually a perfect opportunity for us to say, we're going to see pullbacks. We've still got 75, 80 days until we might have a cycle top in. We're not going to have green days every single one of the times. And so we should not judge it on just one day's worth of things, but actually cumulatively of how it's done. And again, you know, Bitcoin in October has historically been the best month to date. Okay. So we've seen 11% last year, 30% the year before. We've seen 40%, we've seen 30%. These figures alone, you know, we're talking 112,000 when we started. 30%, 112,000, another 36, 40,000 on top of that. Okay, we're suddenly now talking about 150K in the first month. That's just to get to, say, just 30%, I appreciate it. But 30% has been achieved in the past. So we can see how quickly this can happen. And you'll be amazed at the momentum it will build just with the positive sentiment around October if we start to continue that climb. I'm glad that today has happened from the price action point of view. It needs to happen because it was such a strong move up. But we shouldn't rule out October just because of it. There was another chart I was going to show you and I don't have it fired up. Anyway, let's just get into some ordinary charting, shall we? Back over here. I haven't seen any comments there. I made myself a cup of tea. It's going to be stone cold now. I hate drinking cold tea. Anyway, okay, let's get on the daily time frame. And then let's have a look at where things are going. So we can kind of actually see that move up from 112,000, it's actually the base if it was 109,000. Didn't leave too many vectors in our wake. We did leave this one blue vector candle. And, you know, my view has always been in a ranging market, vector candles are going to get taken out. But if you remember when we came back to here, we started this range. My concern was around these vectors initially, particularly when we got a few days into it. But let's just get rid of that now. I wanted to show you where those vectors were, because I was like, okay, we're starting to range. Where's it gonna end? Because what had happened, and I go back to these levels of ranging, is, well, first of all, we had this set of range, and these vector candles, daily time frame, we can still prove the point. 4 hours, it's even more of an obliteration of vector candles. But these vector candles, well, these ones here, were all reclaimed during its time. Then we had this one green vector candle, and we never came back to take it because we cleared this range. We cleared this range with speed, with volume, and we formed a new range. Okay, so this range suddenly became a bit null and void. You can actually extend this out. And so I was more interested in these vector candles because this was the next range that we were in, and we were like, we'd have to break this actual range to take this one down. Not impossible, but it needs something to happen there. Then we went into this secondary range, which I'm just going to mess around with some lines here. I appreciate it's not 100% accurate, but you'll get the point from it. We had this range here that we were working in, and again, clearing out vectors as clear as day. Well, the same point for me still stands. As long as we can stay above that 120 level, my argument is we've left this range behind, okay? This is the next range of vector candles we need to worry about. Now, okay, we fall back through here. It's a different conversation, and actually, we haven't left that range. But at the time, we'd broken through the range with a vector, and we made this sort of correction, this all-time high. We have cleared a new all-time high. And the fact is, if we can just stay above that 120, I will class that as forming a new range. Again, doesn't mean that we can't get back to this, absolutely, of course. But it's something that I'm not looking at until we lose that range. I hope that kind of makes sense in terms of vectors, because we're going to be talking about vectors and targets of what we can reclaim as we go through. Let's just get rid of some of these now. Just try and make this a little bit cleaner. We'll leave that 100,000 line down there, which is the bottom of this vector down here, but it's also where the 50 EMA on the weekly time frame is sitting. So moving out quite nicely. We talked on Friday about this bottoming pattern. I don't want to call it a W formation because it's not really off the bottom of some 3 drops, certainly on the daily time frame, but a bottoming formation there. And again, where's my thing? We came through it, we've moved up, and we're just coming back down. And the argument is, why does it look so wiggly when I do that? It's probably because it's stretched out. Are we just coming back down to retest this level here, where the previous resistance was after such a strong move that's gone through? I think that's likely the case. We haven't touched the 10 EMA in a while. We'll come back down, just touch that. I'm not saying that it's a particularly strong EMA on its own, but tied in with the current support / resistance level, 120,000, I think there's some credence to be given towards that. In terms of the dropping down onto the 4-hour time frame, kind of see actually we had that part of that bottom. We can see all of these vectors that we sort of came through, and I talked about this on Friday. Breaking the 50 EMA with a green vector, which was giving us the momentum through the weekend, which is why I thought we were heading in the direction of taking, or at least challenging, the previous all-time high. We've taken it, but we can see, a lot of these vectors on the way up being taken on the way back down. I've got no problem with that. We've formed a high. Is that a stopping vector candle? I would have preferred the body to be a bit further down here, but there is a vector there with a high test. Fair enough. We've seen this red candle form onto the 50 EMA, but an actual bounce from the 50 EMA. And my argument is going to be then, this has left a lovely stonking bit of a vector there. So, that has to be a target. And if we are bouncing from the 50 EMA, this would likely get eaten up very quickly. Especially with a sudden flush like that to cause a little bit of fear, people buying the top, and then, we need to change our mind. It's going to have to be a bit of a stronger pullback from that, and then bang, legs taken out for us a second time as this starts to move back up. But, now that we're starting to see a 50 EMA there with these sort of vectors, and again, selling volume drying up with the pink, magenta colored candle there, still 22 minutes. If this could sort of close as a magenta candle, but say it's sort of just under 122,000 to give a long wick with a small body, perfect kind of potential reversal candle there, especially off that 50 EMA, and not too close, not too far away, sorry, from that 120 level we're talking about. We're currently sitting at 120,400, so fair enough. Again, yeah, I understand there's plenty of vectors down there which tie in with that other one, and we can talk about those if and when we lose that 120 level. But before that, I'm just going to stick with where we are. In terms of a fib, I don't know if there's anything that's going to tie in with this. Let's just have a look. Okay, so bounce off the 236. Still got 22 minutes for that to close, but okay, there's something there. I appreciate it's looking a bit messy, but yeah, that's where I see Bitcoin, and I appreciate 126. It may now take some effort to get through that level, but I don't think it's as far enough away from the previous all-time high for this to be a range. The only thing that we probably do need to, and I'll go back onto the daily to just talk about, is when we did make that all-time high, we quickly lost it the next candle, and an argument can certainly be made that that's happened. But what did we do? We broke through that 120 level, and then we just continued to fall. So for me, the 10 EMA and the 120, it's looking very similar to what happened with the previous all-time high. No problem with that. The battleground's at the 120 then. That is I suppose a Gandalf line. It's not really if we lose it, but we want to keep hold of that for as best as we can. Going on to BitTensor and other Gandalf lines. So here we currently sit, daily time frame. Why that's still there. We've had that move. We talked about this bottom up, and this was, we broke through over the weekend, or just prior to the weekend, corrected back down to the Gandalf line, which has been a hell of a strong support and resistance line. And then yesterday's move, lovely move up to, as I say, 150,000. We've started to correct. Now, daily time frame, we're currently sitting on the 50 EMA. I don't think there's anything necessarily too much to worry about. As I just go back to the previous spiel I gave at the beginning of this, is I just wanted, from a sentiment point of view, for us to get above that bloody 360 level. We can call a new higher high, and there's just something a bit more positive to talk about. But right now, I kind of get a bit sick of talking about it, but it is just constant lower highs. And I accept that tomorrow this candle could go up there, and then this isn't a lower high anymore, of course, but that's what we were kind of hoping with all of these, and we just see it roll over. So bearing it in mind, we've eaten a decent amount of this green vector candle, almost back down to the 50% of that vector candle. Hopefully that's enough to satisfy the appetite of the sellers. We can actually build something off this 50 EMA and move back up. I mean, on a smaller time frame, at least we can say, locally, since we found that bottom of the sort of 290, we have been making higher highs and higher lows, which is absolutely fine. Again, we look at some of these levels as we came through. Let me get rid of this Gandalf line. Not to confuse people. 4 hour time frame, remember now. So we found the base, burst through that with a green vector candle, exactly what we needed. Ran into the 200 EMA, come back down, corrected off the 50 EMA. Again, no problem. That's what we talked about on Friday. No problem with that kind of sentiment. What we wanted to see, say, we came back, hit the 200 EMA. Fine, bit of a repeat, although we lost the 50 EMA, but the cloud saved us. We've shot straight back through. It's the 800 EMA that's turned us around. Again, I'd suggest fine, as long as we can, keep these two levels here, which are pretty much converging on top of each other, sort of 324 and 328 at the moment, the 250 EMA, then you're like, okay, you just take it as like, it's a pullback, consolidate, let's see that next move. But if you're looking at a much lower time, a smaller time frame, but also a sort of a more of a minute level, I think that 328 level is what you want to have a look at. The cloud's already touching the 200 EMA. That's where I'd be saying, come on, let's keep above this now, and work from it. And then it's just back to the same levels I talked about beforehand. The 364, fine. We've taken a breather to come back to it, no problem. But it's actually on the 4 hour, it's 370. On the daily, it's down here at 364. Horses for courses, whichever one you want to go for. But yeah, that's just what I need to see from it. It had a good day yesterday. We were all pretty happy with that. It's still underperforming compared to a lot of our altcoins out there. So come and get past these levels, prove me wrong, and I'll take it. And let me get rid of this. Or let me just get rid of all the drawings for now. There's arguments that was a nice little bottoming pattern there, and we're moving up, and we're just having a little pullback. I mean, you would definitely say that this is a consolidation period. So you don't really want it going below the 50 EMA because it's kind of tying in with where that first rise ended. And then we move back up. But I'd like to see on this next move up then, that challenge, at least getting to that level, so we can have that conversation. And then we can start trying to build off that 800 EMA. And again, continuing to move up. And again, I went through the targets and the levels that I'm looking at, but it's pretty much just the heads of all of these body closes that we've had on the way down. So that's that one. Let's get rid of this. Let's get rid of that. Let's start with BNB, shall we? I mean, I don't know how as impressive as BNB has done on this one, and it absolutely has. This is looking almost like the gold chart, to be perfectly honest with you. It is an incredible move up, and I just worry about how sustainable that is. Now, I've had worries like that in the past with Ethereum and Link, and they've taken a long time to correct. And hell, fine, if that's the case. I don't own any BNB, and for those of you that do, well done to you. But we are starting to see some pretty steep angles here. I mean, if I can, let's just get rid of some of this for now. Let's see if I can try and find some. I don't know, sort of. So there's a trend line there, which is sort of. There's one there. Potentially one there. We started. You can. I'm doing this not necessarily for the trend lines, but it's just so you can have a visual representation of the angles of the step changes that it's gone through. And we've gone pretty vertical at the moment. So, I appreciate that's not necessarily the neatest. And fine, you can draw that neater if you want. More just how strong this has gone up. So we, expect to come back to at least this sort of region. We start to lose those, and you can just see how big these gaps are before we find any further support. Whether you want to do it as horizontal support just above 1,000, or these diagonal lines, which is pretty much similar, about 1,000 as well, depending on speed. So it just seems like there's a lot of hype in and around BNB at the moment, and I'm not telling you to go against it yet. Hell, you know, the market continually wants to move that way, then go with it. Just be careful. Even on the daily time frame, we're leaving a number of vectors behind us, and we are not in a range. I mean, just look how spread out those EMAs are. Beautiful, but we want to see some corrections, and we haven't touched the 50 EMA since June, so it's actually not that far. Well, okay, it is. It's $300 away. Fair enough. It is a bit further than I thought. But yeah, well done for BNB there. Because I don't get to use Binance anymore, I don't really follow it. I don't know if there's sentiment behind that, if it's this Asta token and the fact that it's been listed to the spot and all of that has got anything to do with it. Well, I'm none the wiser. Moving on to Ethereum. So Ethereum today, it started off the day at like 4,700. Unfortunately, it's correcting, but it's just in a range. It's just, you know, similar kind of range that Bitcoin was in. Ethereum now finds itself in. And, you know, as long as it continues in that range, unfortunately, we have to talk about maybe it being down as low as 4,000. But for me, just a correction after a strong move. And there's no vectors from this move. It's just a strong, sustained move. And we've only pulled back to the 10 EMA. Not necessarily the worst thing to be at. But even if we went a further 100 or so, $200 to the 50 EMA, still, you know, within that range and something that can easily worked within from a 4-hour point of view. A few more vectors to go through, but again, it's leaving vectors in its wake. The fact that we are still in this range, I don't think we can rule these vectors down below out. We've got we're balancing with a 50 EMA as we speak. And then there's a 200 there that can potentially hold us. Maybe there's a fib that might give us a bit more of a guideline. Okay, the 382 is kind of at the bottom of that EMA. Sorry about that sort of vector zone there, but you can kind of see the 0.5 and the 618 sandwiching this big green vector candle quite nicely. So, you know, unfortunately, that could be a target. We know how well 618s play out. Certainly something, unfortunately, to have to watch out for. I think the rest of the markets are kind of there. You know, meme coins rally hard, pull back hard. Ever AI tokens, Link, yeah, if you're into it. XRP, you know, it's had a nice strong move, corrected quite aggressively, but again, leaving that vector there. You know, I argue that is room for it to come back ultimately towards. Dominance on a smaller time frame now. This is what I mean by it's kind of gone sideways, but in that upward trajectory, it's slowly kind of ranging back up. It's kind of making these higher highs and higher lows. We're all just kind of saying we're accepting that can happen, fine, and then we just want to see that roll over. Oops. However many it takes. What we don't want to see for our portfolios is it breaking through that level and just continuing up, because that means that altcoins are getting decimated. So we can kind of sit with it within that range. I still think that, you know, that is probably the course. How high that goes, I don't know, but I do see Bitcoin dominance moving up first before we see some sort of reaction with altcoins and a rotation ultimately from that. In terms of other sort of aspects there, let's just have a look at I mean, Ethereum BTC is having that same battle. You know, nice move up from the summer, correcting back to this trend line, and it's just sort of meandering around a bit like Bitcoin dominance is. And I think, you know, until we have that decision of where Bitcoin's going, that's always going to be the case. Kind of tied into each other there. Dixie, strong bounce off that. You know, this trend line here goes back to like 2015, and it's had again another nice bounce from that. Do we see it go back up to 100 before being countered? I think we'll just have to wait and see. We do have, well, actually, I don't even know if we do, because I know the government still shuts. I'm not sure. CPI data, I think, is supposed to come out next week. Whether or not it does, I don't know. We'll have to take a look at this. And then it's the end of October for the rate cut. And I say rate cut because it seems to be a foregone conclusion that it will be another rate cut there. But in terms of other ones, I touched on them before. You know, Nasdaq, S&P still continue to make all-time highs. Gold just on it, an unsatiable climb north. I was hoping it hit 4,000 today. It hasn't, but that is, it's going to happen. Silver, it didn't quite get to 50. Again, slight pullback today, but nothing to be worried about. And again, these angle climbs on the weekly time frame as well. For silver and gold, precious metals, they are strong moves over a very short period. I mean, silver started this year off at 30. We're about to be at 50. Yeah, wild. Some of these other stocks, so Coinbase has finally closed its gap, which it had beforehand, which is this one here. It's finally done it. Circle, it's too new for the vectors, but it is starting to move back up. Fair enough. MicroStrategy, again, find some life. Nvidia, Tesla. Yeah, okay, so they're all sort of there. I'm just trying to think if there's any others worth running through. Probably not. Just to go back to Bitcoin on a clean chart, and just, again, if nothing else, just to reiterate, it is October. I don't think any of us in the group are particularly worried about today's pullback. I think we're all level-headed enough to say you can't move $16,000 in one direction without some sort of correction. This correction, I hopefully has sort of shown you that although $4,000 on the day in terms of extremities, actually, I mean, we're already at 2,500 now. We're starting to see some sort of recovery there, but there's plenty of reasons and levels of it's come back to and potentially found some support there. So that's fine. We need it to breathe. We've still got 24 days left of October for us to see some growth there, and plenty of time to see. It's already still up 7% even after today's pullback. You can only imagine where this could be if we do get an October like we've had before. So I just say, let's just be level-headed. Let's just think about, where this is going. Remind yourself, whether you're a Q4 or Q1er, blow the dust off whatever your signal is that you want to use as your real big canary in the coal mine to try and think about getting out, because it may be upon you before you know it, but actually we could still have plenty, maybe not time, but plenty of room to see some of these go. So I know I'm not necessarily a time-based person. As I said, we come to a few weeks into January 2026, we're still continuing to make higher highs. Then, whether or not that 4-year cycle is quite there, perhaps not. And we'll just roll straight into it, into Q1. I'm more looking at price action, speed and volume of which things start to fall off before I start to make any moves. But as we get closer to the year end, I'll probably sort of flesh that out a little bit better. I think we'll just end it there. It's only 50 minutes, but I think we've kind of covered most things that we need to talk about. Be patient, stick with it. For those of us that are in town, and it's not the end, as I say. We just need to see it break some of those levels. We all know where they are. I don't know how it's done with alpha tokens. I'm sure someone can tell me in Discord about that. Final things, I suppose, if you haven't already got your ticket for whatever they're calling the cuddle in November, I don't think there's many spots left, so definitely have a look at that. Thing to mention, I don't know if you've realized, it's actually spread across 2 venues. So the daytime is actually where we normally are in the Willows Center. The evening night do is in the other hotel. So if you're trying to pick which hotel you want to go to and you can't be bothered with a 5-minute drunken walk back at 2 a.m. or whatever, then just stay in the second hotel, not the usual one we stay in. It's called like the Drift Inn or something now. It used to be called the Waterfront. But if you've got any question on it, just ask Lewis. He will help you out with that one. Trading Pub as usual on Thursday at 1 p.m. I'll do some more charting on Friday and just see where we've gone. And other than that, I'm not really doing anything too drastic. I should have mentioned, sorry, the 2 trades I was in, the leverage trades, Bitcoin and Solana, they both closed today. I won't bother bringing them up. I was just moving the stops up and they got hit. It's absolutely fine. They both closed in profit. We'll take that. Haven't re-entered yet. I'm just waiting to see what happens. I just really want to stick with Bitcoin, and Solana just seemed like an easy one to do. But I'll try and give some advance warning when I go in on the next ones if I do. But enjoy the rest of your evening, everybody, and I will speak to you all soon. Cheers now.